area. And then I think we also have quite a few people from some of our other JEC chapters across the country. So if everyone wants to maybe introduce themselves in the chat, write their name, their school, their grade, and maybe why they were interested in coming to today's event, that would be great. And also if you're able to turn your camera on, that would also be good, just to have more people being able to engage in today's presentation. So we're honored to have Matt today to speak to us. And just as some background on the Junior Economic Club, for those who may not know, it was founded in 2014 and is an entirely student-run nonprofit that introduces high school students to the business and economics through member engagement events, forums, and community initiatives. So we currently have over 130 students from 34 high schools across Chicago, as well as chapters in 9 cities across 4 countries. So if you're not a member already, you can learn more about the club and admissions at junioreconomicclub.org. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brandon, who's a JEC ambassador and has done a great job coordinating this event today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brandon Bousquette. I am a junior at the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools in Chicago. Today, we're going to be listening to my dad talk about different aspects of marketing and how they manifest themselves in the business world, and sort of a path to success through marketing and distribution. The reason why I chose this event is my family is very centered on like kind of analysis of business, in that when we see other people marketing and advertising, like we find it interesting to question why the company did what they did. So I thought it would be interesting to share some of the important questions that my dad has asked about these situations and give you all the analytical frameworks to assess them. So without further ado, you can go ahead and share your screen, Dad.
Good evening, everyone. Congratulations on finishing probably a crazy semester before winter break. So I'll try to be a little less schooling and a little more entertaining for you as sort of the transition to your winter break. I'm going to talk about, well, I titled it The Road to Riches, Marketing in the Workplace. And before we get started, I think an important thing for everybody to realize, especially as you're sort of transitioning from high school into college, and you'll have a lot of professors and various people speak to you at different times, and they all, they will all submit their experts in everything. And the thing I'd like you to just think about is a person's point of view is really influenced by what they've done and who they know and what their experiences are. And I think it's important when anybody is ever presenting to you or you're listening to have some perspective on that, because it'll help you better understand and be able to vet how you think about their point of view. So to do that, I'd give you a little bit of background on myself. Out of school, I went to work for a company called Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, Ohio. They're a very large multinational, and they're probably one of the best brand marketers in the world. They're known as sort of classic brand management. And at the time, I'm going to date myself, you're all so young, we invented and launched a brand called Pringles, which it's hard to believe they didn't exist at one point in time, but that was one of the fun things that we did there. And it was interesting because Procter & Gamble was at a point in time back then where there really wasn't sort of all this sort of the global media and the internet didn't exist even. And so various countries of the world and how they marketed and what people wanted at different times was very disjointed. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Went from there to a company called Beecham Products that people may not know, but they'll recognize what we launched there. It was a brand called Aquafresh toothpaste with all the various stripes and the little the container itself. And again, that was a multinational, but it was a British company. So it's an interesting thing when you work in the US for a foreign national company, it gives you different perspective on how they do things. So the first one was an American multinational. The second one was a British company where we were working in the US. The third company was a product service company. It was a smaller one. It's called Teleflora, and they competed with FTD. So whenever you want to send flowers from one place to another, we basically built a network of about 25,000 florists, and it's how you sort of transacted flowers back and forth. So it was really service marketing. So it was a US-based, smaller service marketing company. Then went to work for Mattel Toys, and eventually became the president of the company. And Mattel is a global company as well, and we have a ton of brands, including Barbie, Hot Wheels, American Girl, Fisher Price, etc. And we'll talk about that in a second. Then after I left there, I bought a company with some friends, which was Enesco and Gund, and we marketed primarily to Hallmark stores and people like that, smaller gift stores. So it was a completely different channel, done completely differently. So that sort of gives you background. So as I talk about things today, know that I've sort of been US-based global, British-based global, US-based smaller size service, the toy industry, and then small alternative channels. So it's a lot of different perspectives on the topic. Mattel, you know, we can talk a little bit about it just because it's Christmas time. Mattel is over $5 billion in sales. We market in over 150 countries, 25,000 employees. And this is the interesting thing. There are 3,000 new products a year. You got to think about that just for a second. So everybody thinks toys is really easy and fun, but the truth is, think about it this way. When does anybody tell Santa they want the same thing they got last year? So whatever it is you make, the truth is you've got to come up with something new the very next year. So it's sort of the acid test for innovation. What's here today is gone tomorrow. And the second part of it is, think about what's called your target market, right? So somebody who likes your product. If you were buying call it an Apple Watch, right? Somebody buys an Apple Watch, they could like an Apple Watch for 20 years, at least 10 years. But here, the difference between 5 and 15 is huge. So what you like at 5, you certainly don't like at 15. So your target market ages very fast too. So it's a very, very fast-paced business overall. So when you talk about business, there's like 4 different ways you can do it generally. One is textbook, right? You're going to go through how things work and you're going to explain all the various pieces and parts, but I figure you're all getting out of school right now. It's the last thing you want to do today. The second thing is case studies, which a lot of times are really interesting, but often for people, the problem is in a case study, you remember the case study, but you can't figure out how to apply it to other things. Third is a panel discussion. And the last one is what's basically called inquiry-based questions. And we're going to do with number 4 today. And the reason we're going to do that is it's kind of fun, and it'll leave you with the ability to look at other people's businesses like every day, especially over the holiday period, and just say, hey, why are they doing that? Or what do you think they did that? And so I'll leave you with some questions that you can be your own armchair quarterback on everybody else's marketing plan. So everybody says, what is marketing? What are they talking about, right? Well, the truth is it's really different by company, right? So the marketing department of Apple Computer is wildly different than the marketing department of Midwest Basket and Wire, right? And it depends on the product and the market and the target. So it's very specific to the industry. So it's fascinating is when you're sort of out and working in the business and you go to interview for a job, it's really important to do a lot of research about the company to understand, because people use the term marketing and what they expect and the skills they want are very different by company. So it's something that you really have to give some thought and understanding to. But I would say this, there's way more science and strategy than there is glamour. The glamour is the part that we see every day. Like if somebody wants to look and see, oh my God, look at the ad on Instagram or YouTube, or look at the Super Bowl commercial, or I really love that billboard. But the truth is there's a ton of sort of science behind all of that and strategy, and that's just the execution at the end. So you're talking about product and the positioning and the packaging and the target market and distribution and advertising, even entertainment. A lot of times movies or television shows or magazines or books all relate to your ability to market. But the thing you want to do is obviously you want to develop it, but you got to test it and then implement it and then repeat and start over again. So you're constantly in the innovation part. So I developed these buckets, and I call it the road to riches. And what it is how to talk about this in regular people words, right? So there aren't, and so that's what we're going to walk through. The first is the idea. What is it that you got? What is your product, or what is your service, or what are you talking about? So the question is it unique from what's really out there already? And what's your point of difference? And is it something somebody really cares about, right? And when I mean that, it's like not the first, you want the new iPhone, you don't want the first left-handed waffle flipper, because the truth is nobody cares about the left-handed waffle flipper. So what you've got to do is you've got to make sure if you've got an interesting idea or an interesting product that somebody cares about. Then the second mistake people make a lot of times is they think more is better. And what I mean by more is better is they throw tons of features into something. So how many of you have gotten any product? Think about products you've got that are new, where you still don't know what half the features are, right? There's still buttons and you haven't looked at them, and page 47 of the instructions, and it's got all the extra features. Yes, there are some people like grind through them all and know them all, but the truth is, more often than not, you're probably over engineering or over innovating in your product and adding too much. And the idea is to figure out, what do people really care about? What's different, right? And then the question is, can you protect it, right? Because if you're a new person just starting out, or you're just coming into an industry, or your company is relatively small, how do you protect it from other companies who say, what a great idea, I'm going to go out there and introduce it and put it in my product already, and mine are already on the shelf, and then you're done and you're gone, right? You're wiped out. The same thing, and there's been a lot in the press about it recently, about what Google has been doing and what Amazon has been doing, right? So in both cases, on the Google side, they've been sort of knocking off other people's services and models. It's really been Google and Facebook have both been accused of sort of crunching small guys and knocking out their competitors. And Amazon, the same thing, where small companies will sell on Amazon. Amazon gets the data, sees what a great product, and introduces their own version of it. So it's key to think about how you can protect and manufacturers, right? So in a lot of cases, unfortunately, from a supply chain standpoint, when people are starting out, many people they'll go to China or someplace else to get their first product manufactured. And the very first thing the manufacturer does is steal the design and start manufacturing and selling the product too. So in the toy business, we spent an infinite amount of time chasing around, in particular, manufacturers who they would take and they would sell a counterfeit version of Barbie, and they'd sell it for like, a third the price, because all they did was take our molds and produce it and sold it at night out the back door to somebody else. So as you're thinking about your idea, it's really important not just to have a good idea, but to have an idea that somebody can't steal from you. I don't know how else to say it that way. And then I guess the next part is, as the owner or inventor or partner in an idea or a service, being a true believer is great. You got to have that. You want to have that passion. But this is the moment to check to see if other people believe as you do. So before you go to the next step, it's important that you do some kind of testing, some kind of research, or get some kind of feedback that, yes, in fact, you do have a great product or service that has some idea somebody cares about. And if you've got that and you think you've got a way you can protect it, then we can sort of head to the next box, which is the target audience and who cares about it, right? So the target audience is basically, what group of people are you going to focus on targeting, right? You can think of it in a ton of different ways. You could break it by demographics. You could say by age or gender or race, or maybe location, all the people who live in certain states, or all the people who go to Starbucks. Or you could do it by passions or interests, people who love sports teams, people who love to sew. There's a zillion different ways you can cut it, but you've got to figure out who you're targeting to. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is they say, oh, my target is everyone. You immediately know that's not the answer, because that's too broad, and that's not going to get you what you want in the end. So once you come up with a great idea, the question is, who's it a great idea for? And that's really, and a lot of times what people say is, that's like my primary audience, my primary target audience. That's sort of the end users who are going to use it, or the people who really care about your product. There's another group of people that you really want to make sure you think about too, which is the secondary audience, which would be like retailers, if you were going to sell it to retailers, or media or bloggers, or in the case of toys, parents, right? Because in Mattel, what we used to do is we would advertise to kids, but we'd also have to make sure the parent was okay with them getting that particular thing. So our primary audience was to try and convince a 7-year-old girl that she needed the next holiday Barbie. But at the same time, we needed to make sure mom was okay with her daughter getting the holiday Barbie. So a lot of times you got your primary audience, but you got somebody else in the background you want to keep your eyes on as well, right? And so the more focused your target audience is, the more you understand age or demographics or whatever, you can spend your money smarter. The more you say it's to everybody, then you're going to be running around spending money on people who are, at the end of the day, don't really matter, or they don't really care. So the key is, do you have the right target audience? Do they really care about your product? And and here's the other thing, are there enough of them to be successful? Because the point is, if you've got a great product, but it's only for 42-year-old men who live in North Carolina, the odds are you're probably not going to be successful in the long term selling as much as you'd like to sell. So target audience, you got to spend the time figuring out who they are. And really, it's really a question of saying who they're not, right? It's the classic, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. And at some point in time, those other people may be interested or may be right, but not right now. And with the advent of the global media perspective, the target audience around the world by country is more similar than different. So you'd be shocked that generally between the ages of 5 and 40, people in various countries want the same thing at the same time. So the latest launch of Nike shoes, the latest launch of a Barbie doll, the latest launch of an iPhone, 10 or 20 years ago, people in different countries would be lagging, but now people want the same thing at the same time. They want to go see the new movie opening all at the same time. So when you're talking about your target audience, when you define it well, it, most cases will work across countries. I mean, there will always be exceptions, of course, but you're going to find more similar than different as you're looking across the countries. Then the question is, so now you got an idea, you think you can protect it, you think you've got some people who care about it, and you figured out who those people are, right? So the next question is, how are you going to tell them about it? How are they going to know that you've got this great thing now that you've figured out who those people are? And all the fancy academics say, okay, now we got to make our marketing plan. So we're going to call it the marketing plan, but it's really, how are you going to tell your target market about what you got? So the first thing you want to think about is awareness, right? You want people to be aware of what you've got. So we're not even talking about convincing them to buy it. They don't even know it exists, right? So the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out, how am I going to tell my target about my products and services? Then once I tell them about it, what is it I'm going to say that's going to convince them, not just now that I know it exists, how am I going to convince them that they want it, right? That they got to buy it. And the third thing is like, how do I get them to come back? Because it's one thing to introduce something, make them aware of it, make them buy it once, but to really make a lot of money long-term, you want that same guy to come back again and again. And what they talk about is what's that customer worth, right? So again, just take and we'll take an individual Barbie doll again. So a girl goes out and buys one Barbie doll and she could spend $10. But the truth is, over the life of span of a girl buying Barbie dolls, she'll end up buying as many as 14 or 15. So all of a sudden, instead of being worth $10, that same girl is worth $240. And so the question is, and you think about it the same thing, you can do it the other way. You can think about it, take an Apple, right? So you buy the iPhone, but then you want to come back and you want to buy the case, and you want to buy the earphones, and you want to buy various different add-ons. So the question is how you keep them coming back. So it's first, how do they know I exist, what my product is? The second is, how do I convince them to buy it? The third is, how do I keep them? And so the question is, what words or ideas are you going to use to convince your target audience to do that? Now, remember back we talked about target audience. So the more distinct you can make your target audience, the easier the words are because you know who you're talking to. And at that, once you've done all that work, then you get to do what people consider the fun stuff, which is figure out where you're going to tell your story. Because everybody starts there first saying, oh my God, I want to do the YouTube video, I want to do the Instagram thing, I want to do Snapchat, whatever it is. That happens after you've done all the other sort of math and science around it. So all the strategy comes first, all the math about the number of people, because you want to figure out if you have a lifetime value of the customer, you're going to know how much money you want to spend to go get that customer, right? So if that customer is only going to be worth 50 bucks, you don't want to spend $80 finding a customer that's only going to buy $50 of the product. So knowing what the potential lifetime value of the customer is will help you choose what amount of money to spend on marketing. Because otherwise, you could end up getting yourself in trouble. So this is the way I've always said it, which is the marketing plan is key to your business health, right? Overspending marketing dollars in the wrong way is one of the quickest ways to bankrupt a company. All of you are probably too young to know, but somewhere around like 1999 to 2000, there were all these introductions of internet companies that were just sort of getting out there and weren't making money. And they had like sock puppets and a variety of other things, and spent millions and millions of dollars on commercials on the Super Bowl. And then later they all went bankrupt because they spent the money in the wrong places on the wrong way. They were going for glamour and fun and shiny objects and whatever was kind of woke and cool at the time. They wanted to see their company there, even though their customer wasn't there. Right. So sometimes like you want to walk around your neighborhood and sort of brag, wow, that was my company. Didn't you see our cool ad? Well, yeah, but if the people who are buying it weren't seeing it, then you're doing the wrong thing. The same time on the other side, which is lack of enough spending on customers and keeping them interested in your product, can also lead to bankruptcy the other way. So if you don't spend enough money, then you'll never get awareness and nobody will ever hear of you and nobody's going to buy your product and you're not going to get any sales. You're going to go bankrupt the other way. So key to all of this is, again, it sounds like a bit of a broken record, but continuing to sort of test and correct and check is really important because it's never perfect in the first time around. So then the question is, so what we got our idea, we know who it is who cares about it, we figured out how we're going to tell them, but then the question is, where do they find your product, right? So where can they actually go buy it? Now, I'm going to talk sort of post-COVID because I'm like optimistic, like we're getting to the end here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time about you can't find it, you're locked down, you can't get your toilet paper, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to talk about sort of the post-COVID world, where can you go find your product and how that works. So that's basically called the distribution plan, or where can your customers find either your product or your service, right? And the first question you've got to ask yourself or your company is, am I going to sell directly to consumers? Meaning the person who's going to buy my product, am I the owner or manufacturer of that product and service going to provide it directly to the end consumer, or is somebody else going to do that for me? And a lot of times you'll find service people do that, right? So I'm going to sell the service of the internet, or I'm going to sell cable service, or I'm going to sell, YouTube, or a video game, a multi-channel video game. You will use, a lot of times you'll market directly to the consumer who's going to use it. But very often on the product side, you're actually selling to somebody else who then is going to sell to your end consumer. So for instance, products that you see on the shelf at Target or at Joe's Toy Store or at Amazon, the manufacturer or the person with the idea is selling to the retailers who then turn around and sell to you. Right. And so that makes it a little bit more complicated, and you've got to kind of figure out where you want to go. So direct sales, you generally make more money, but you have higher costs and higher risk, right? Because if you're going to sell the product directly to the end consumer, that means you got to have your own warehouse. You got to figure out how you're going to distribute the product. If it doesn't sell, you own it. You got to do a lot more marketing. There are a lot of things you got to do if you're going to sell direct, but you tend to make more money on the top line, but not necessarily on the bottom line. But the goal is, what you want to do is you got to have the product in the right place at the right time at the right price for your customer. That's the goal. You've got to kind of think about how that works. Things you got to consider when choosing, which is, how important is awareness? So is it a category that already exists and you've got something new, right? So are you selling, the coolest, latest thing in housewares, the neatest, pots and pans or sharp knives or something else in the category exists? Or are you trying to sell a category that nobody's ever heard of and you're the first person to ever do it? And that gets a little bit more complicated. The second is, how important is it to be touched or tried, right? Some products, consumers want to feel it, look it, touch it, try it, either just because there's some tactility to it, or there's some explanations that's needed, or that it's new, in which case they're going to want to have to see it before they purchase it, and you're going to have to think about that. The same thing with, I know this is a dumb one, but how big is it, right? So if you think about Fisher-Price, and for anybody who's got younger kids or remember when they were young, Fisher-Price is always those really big blow molded toys that are really huge that you sort of fill up half of your living room. Those are really hard to send, ship. And so a lot of times those will end up in stores versus ending up selling them direct. So here's an interesting thing, right? And this is a killer, and people rarely think about this, which is, why would a retailer buy your product? So I've seen in my career tons and tons of great ideas get all the way to this stage right here in this box and then die. And the reason they die is not that it wasn't a good idea, not that they didn't have a good target audience, it's they couldn't convince the retailer to buy it. And you're like, well, I don't understand. What do you mean? Well, here's what it is. Think about this. All the space at every retailer generally is filled, meaning there's already a product on the shelf there, right? And you're arriving, and what you basically have to do is you have to convince the retailer, I don't care which one you want to pick, let's pick Walmart, right? You got to convince Walmart to kick off somebody else's product and put yours there. And so that what they need to do is be convinced that your product is going to sell more than the one that's already there. Sometimes it's easy because whatever product they have there is a dud or it's run its life or whatever, and sometimes it's hard, right? So to give you an example, right? If you've gone into a Walmart and you see those little pegs where Hot Wheels cars are on them, they hang them on the little pegs and they go there. Walmart sells 1 million Hot Wheels cars a day. So think about that, 1 million a day. So for anybody to try and get those pegs for anything or that space for anything, they have to be more productive than 1 million cars a day, which is pretty tough. So the odds are, at least as long as Hot Wheels cars continue to sell that well, they're going to continue to have that space. And so the key thing is, if you've got a new product, and the problem with a lot of new products is they got to believe, and a lot of times you have no track record, right? So it's a new idea or a new product, and you've got to show up with research or other things to compel that retailer to believe that they need to put your product there. And what's amazing about it is, because of the global nature of things now and the global retailers now, if you can get the product in one country, very often you're going to get that same product in maybe 8, 10, 12, 15 countries just like that. So Walmart, the ability to get in the Walmart planogram here is going to get you in Canada, it's going to get you in Mexico, it's going to get you in a lot of other places out of the gate. The second thing is, so first they got to believe that it'll sell. And then the second thing they got to believe is that they can make money on it. Because that's the other thing a lot of times people don't think about, right? So you're like, oh, I have this great idea. Consumers are really going to love it. You got to carry it because it's great. And you know what? They may be convinced that they may be convinced it's a great product, and they may be convinced the consumers are going to want it. But if they don't think they can make money selling it, what's the purpose of going through all that effort, right? They're going to take away space on their shelf. They're going to have all that activity. People are going to come, they're going to put it on the shelf. They're going to take it to check out, and they're going to leave. But if at the end of the day, Walmart didn't make any money on that whole exercise, like, what's the point? And so oddly enough, that's the second thing that people don't really think about. And here's what's interesting is price and pricing has a huge impact on your ability to get stuff in a store. And you're like, okay. And so what you think about in your mind is, well, okay, it just needs to be cheap or expensive or not really. It's a little bit more complicated than that, right? So take a product and you say, I'm going to sell it to a retailer for $10, right? They're going to take their own margin and markup somewhere between 30 and 100%, depending on the retailer and their costs. So the purpose of them raising the price of what they bought it from you are, one, obviously, they want to make a profit, right, on selling your product. But two, they got to cover their own costs. So they have their rent and their utilities and the payroll and their own marketing. So they add all of that in, divide it by the products they have there, and they come up with a markup where they got to mark up things that they buy. And what happens is, the bigger the retailers, are, so at Target, for instance, they can mark up things, 25 or 30%, whereas Joe's Toy Store didn't need to mark up things like 70% to recover his costs because he's a smaller operation selling fewer things. So it gets complicated, right? So take the Barbie doll that we sold for $10 to Target. So Target's going to take that Barbie doll and they're going to sell it for $13 on the shelf. I'm going to take that same Barbie doll to Joe's Toy Store, and for him to make any money, he's got to sell it for $17. And he's going to say, well, like, nobody's going to buy it from me for $17 when he can go to Target and buy it for $13. So channels of distribution and who you want to sell to and where your customer is really important. So you'll often hear that there are brands that are trying not to sell to maybe a Target or a Walmart because it makes it impossible for other people to necessarily sell the product. And one of the things that's made Amazon so unbelievably successful is that they've been selling everything for less than everybody else. And they've been doing that for years, and because the cost structure is lower and they didn't need to make any money. And so what happens is, as a manufacturer or owner of an idea, you're like, oh, wouldn't it be great to sell to Amazon? Well, the minute you sell to Amazon, sometimes these other stores don't want to buy your product. And that may be okay if that's where your consumers are and that's what you want to do. But remember, Amazon is also the guy who comes out, they see you're doing well, and they come out with their own version of what you got. So it's a minefield out there of things to think about, but it's just kind of a fun, interesting way to think about that. So when you're sort of out there wandering around, think about why is that here, and look at the price and oh, geez, I saw it for Amazon over there, and why are they having it in these two places, or why isn't it here and why is it there? And it can be anything from high-end shoes to women's purses to televisions. And sometimes what people will try and do is they'll change the product just a little bit so everybody has their own version, right? And so one of the great ways to do that is when you go into an electronics store and you look at a television and there's the BA124 and the C162, and you'll notice that all the model numbers change. And the reason they're doing that is so it's harder for you, the consumer, to compare them so that you don't see the price difference. So you'll see that a lot when you go, next time you go into a Costco, either alone or with your parents, stop in the electronics area and look at all of the televisions and look at all of the numbers and the models on them, and then try and compare them to Best Buy. It's impossible. It like melts your mind, and they do that for that reason. So now we've got the idea, we've got who cares about it, you've got how you're going to tell them about it, you got where you're going to find it, and then it's what are you going to do to update it or make a better product, or how are you going to innovate, right? So these are two classic things, and they're so true, right? The first one is success is fleeting, right? It's a wonderful thing. You've got something wildly successful, everybody likes it, and then you know what have you done for me lately? So let me give you a great example, right? So there have been these wild successes in the toy business. I don't know if any of you guys are old enough or not old enough. There's a thing called Tickle Me Elmo, right? And so we sold Tickle Me Elmo. It was a huge hit for Christmas. People couldn't get it anywhere. They fought over it in the stores. And comes January, like, who cares about that anymore? So what do you got that's new, right? And so your success, as wonderful as it is, you get about an hour and a half to celebrate it. And then you're on to what do you have that's new, and what are you going to do for me, and how are you going to keep me? And it's what I was saying at the very beginning. It's like, what kid has said to Santa, bring me what you had last year, I'll take that again. Right? And so to put an actual number around this, Mattel's sales of $5.5 billion, 85% of it are new every year. So you get to December 31st, you take all of the products they offer, which is, close to 4,000 or 5,000 individual different items. You throw out 85% of it, you keep 15% of the items, and you have to come up with brand new ideas to go sell to all those guys to innovate, to sort of do another year. And, if you don't out innovate yourself before someone else does, you're going to get killed. So, and it could be your competitor, right? It could be another toy company. It could be a retailer, right? You can see where Amazon or Toys R Us or Target or whatever would make their own version of it. Or it could be a disruptor, somebody from way outside the toy business coming in with, a great example was the console video games, right? When they arrived and they took a chunk out of the toy business. And, you've got to come out with, you got to think about what are you going to do? What are new features going to be, the new functions, new uses? The worst thing, I guess, if you get desperate and you see a guy in year 2 and they just lower the price, they say, oh, now we have such and such and it's now lower. They're desperate because they couldn't come up with anything else to innovate for, so they lowered their price. But take a second and think about this. Think about companies or products that you remember that aren't around anymore, right? So it's amazing. I heard a stat the other day, of the Fortune 500 companies, that when they started out with the Fortune 500 companies, half of them are gone. And what that means is over the course of time, either the product or the company, they stopped innovating or somebody ran them over, right? With their own innovation or their own disruption. I mean, there's a zillion, think about that. You can talk about 8-track tapes or cell phone car antennas, or you can go out the whole categories that have sort of come and gone, typewriters, right? And so this is really key, is whatever your service is or whatever your product is, you've got to be thinking about what are you going to do to innovate or where you're going to go. Otherwise, you're going to end up on the dead company or the dead product list. And it's super long, right? It's kind of a fun thing to think about. Like next time you're sort of sitting by yourself, try and make a list of, like, when you see a category, go, oh, I remember there used to be this, that, and the other thing. And they're all gone now. And the question is, what happened to them? And so that helps you on the innovation front. So as you're going through these, there's kind of what I call the roads to riches steps. If you can do that, you go to the right and you make riches. But the key to all of this is you got to course correct and take feedback at every single step of the way, because if you don't, it's going to get you, right? So it's a bit of a cliche to say continuous feedback and improvement, but it really means it's true. At each step of the ways you've sort of been going through them, from the product idea to the target market, to your marketing, to your innovation, you've got to change, because as passionate about the product or the idea or the marketing is, if you're deaf to real feedback, if you can't take it or you're convinced, no, I've got it, it's going to kill you. So I can't think of a product or a service that succeeded exactly as they originally intended it to. And there's whole stories of entire companies that are going. I mean, Apple Computer almost went bankrupt at one point in time, and look at them today. So you hear about the failures of people as they come and go, and that's because what they had the ability to do was course correct as they went along. So the people who have really succeeded well were humble enough to look at the feedback and say, oh gosh, we need to either market different or change the product or change the target market or do this or do that, because all along you're going to get feedback. And if you can set up your company or your culture to be able to get that feedback and operate on it quickly, it's gonna make a huge difference. And these are global commentaries. So this feedback loop works pretty much everywhere. And most of these things work everywhere just because of the media overall and the way it works today. So what I tell you to do is start, have fun, right? So think about some of the questions we talked about and look around and say, like, okay, that's an interesting product. I wonder who the target market really is, or why are they doing that? You'll see an ad and it'll be like, either in the wrong place or on the wrong time, or you're like, well, wait a minute, isn't the target market this or that? So now you can be sort of the armchair quarterback to try and figure out whether or not the marketing department of any company is doing it's got the right product, or start to notice the advertisements and the prices and just kind of look and say, why are they doing that? And what it makes you start to think strategically. And when you start to ask the questions, and they're just like regular people kind of questions, it doesn't require, you don't need a great computer to figure it out, but it lets you start to think about products and marketing and services and strategy, regardless if you're going to go into marketing. I don't care what business you go into, the ability to sort of ask these kind of questions is going to help you anywhere. And try and figure out like why companies did what they did. And it allows you to be a kind of a critical thinker of overall strategy and direction. And it's kind of fun, right? And so, and engage people in the conversation. Like when you see an ad and say, okay, like, why'd they do that? And somebody's going, I don't know. And you can have some debate on it, but being a strategic thinker is way more important than sort of following some of the by the book individual pieces and parts. And it's because of media today, you're going to find probably 85 or 90% of this is consistent on a global basis. And you'll find, regional differences or individual cultural differences in countries, but 85% of the stuff is the same. So 30 or 40 years ago, we would make different Barbie dolls for different countries because everybody had to have their own thing. But today we do some unique things around people's holidays or special things that we would do maybe in Germany or France or someplace else, Brazil. But for the most part, and Japan has some unique qualities to it. But generally, globally, it's the same versus different. And the ability to sort of leverage your product, your marketing, your sales on a global basis will make a huge difference overall. So those are just sort of, I wanted to give you some fun ways to just sort of think about what you see and make you more kind of aware and sort of make you an armchair sort of strategist. So you can evaluate these big companies and what they're looking at, what they're doing. Any one of these individual pieces or parts could be like whole presentations on themselves. So it's a bit of a flyby in a little bit of time. But I thought it would be a fun way for you to sort of stare at products and commercials and marketing and stuff right around the holiday period. So I'm be happy to answer any questions I guess anybody has. And if nobody has any questions, I'd be happy for everybody to enjoy their holiday, I guess. I will turn it over to, I don't know who is next, but I will mute myself and thank you for the opportunity to talk to everybody today.
So the next person would actually be me. Thanks so much for the presentation, Dad. Really appreciate it. Some super interesting insights. Oh, if you have a question, yeah, you can go ahead and shout it out.
Okay, thanks for that. My question is, what were some of the biggest challenges when it comes to managing a large company between managing a smaller company?
I think the biggest challenge on a large company, particularly a global company, to be honest, is employee alignment. And people often forget that one of your big constituencies are employees. And especially as you start to get into like 150 different countries and you're getting into a lot of different languages, you need to spend a fair amount of time selling your strategy and selling and getting everybody kind of aligned so that they're all doing the same thing. Otherwise, it could be incredibly dysfunctional. So I think on global companies in general, the culture, and even not global, but just large, the importance of the culture and the employees as ambassadors of your company and your strategy and your products is critically important. And more often than not, a lot of time is not spent on them as a constituency. Usually it's left to the HR department and they really didn't, that's not really the way it should go. So to do it successfully, we generally would over communicate. So we would have meetings at least monthly, if not more often, for the entire company, and try to break it down and explain what we were doing and why we were doing it. But most important was to make everybody in the company understand what role they had in success, right? It's one thing to get up there and have a slide and say, here's our strategies and here's our, our goal and our objectives. The more important thing is, I used to say it like this: how do you make the cashier in the cafeteria during lunch understand the role she or he might play in the success of the company? And so the more successful companies have employees who are aligned with and understand how they contribute, and they're happier employees. So that would be one of the biggest challenges on a big company. On a smaller company, one of the issues you have is you don't have the same resources, first of all. And the second of all, you don't have the depth of bench, right? And so if you have a weakness in an area or a problem, it's sometimes hard because that's the sole person who's done it. So Bob or Mary Jane might be the only person who's run the distribution center for the last 27 years. And the truth, Bob or Mary Jane might not be very good at it, but everybody's terrified to replace Bob or Mary Jane because nobody else knows it, because there's only one person who does the job to begin with. And so one of the key things in smaller companies is, how do you build a bench, or how do you cross-train so that you don't feel like you're held hostage to the weakest link because nobody else knows that job and can't replace it. So I'd say on a smaller company, and so in both companies, I'd say it's really related to the people. And how do you recruit, train, keep people, and keep them aligned? And I would say that's one of the biggest difference between the two. And companies in general, most companies don't spend enough time doing it.
Sorry, I have a quick question. When it comes to large scale companies and working in like a team environment, what is the best way to go through with an idea when different people have contradicting ideas on what the best way may be?
Right. So at the end of the day, that's all. What you're going to have to do is, it's the classic case of you need people who don't report to you to agree with what you've got. And so a lot of times that is, you not just have to have the idea, but you got to have the backup or support for your idea to sort of push it forward. Because here's the thing, if all you have is the words I think or I believe, and that's it, I always used to say the guy with the biggest paycheck wins, right? So if you think this, but your boss thinks that, a lot of times the boss is going to win because he gets the bigger paycheck. But if you think something and say to the boss, hey, look, here's some research, or we did this, or I believe this, or let me show you why I think my idea is good, then your chances of success are exponentially higher. So the thing I would say to everybody is do your homework and have an explanation for the team as to why. And I think, again, very similar on a mic, because you raise a good point, which is cross-functional teams of people need to communicate and work together to achieve an end result in companies today. And the more the people on the team can understand and have empathy for the roles that people play and how they all fit together, you're going to be that much more successful. So one of the things that we used to have a class in two of our companies where we sent people to it, oddly enough, it was how to gain emotional intelligence and how to have empathy. So because any communication is, to make it successful, the other person has to understand what you're talking about. So if you feel like you've just said the words to them, but they haven't sort of taken it in and they don't really understand it, that's really a function of not enough time has been spent sort of having everybody understand and appreciate what everybody else does. And I know it can be a little bit like weird and fluffy and whatever, and I'm not talking about like everybody's got to go, hang from the trees to make it work, but the ability for people on your team, whoever your team members are, to understand what role everybody plays and how they all can contribute, that then builds a level of trust with them for your idea. So your facts and your homework with your trust, because you built it, ends up getting a team that works better that way. And sometimes, frankly, you're going to have to muscle it through. Say, hey, I believe this. I need you guys to go with me on it. Bum, bum. But more often than not, what you want to do is you want to rally the troops because you're going to need them, and particularly in big companies.
I have a question. So, given the amount of products that need to be invented and reviewed each year, which I suspect would be increasing in an incredible company, for example, how do you count for each newly invented product individually, given the incredibly competitive market today? And this is like in terms of patents and the amount of products predicted you want to produce for your customers, et cetera.
Yeah, so I'll take Mattel, right, as an example, which is you are constantly developing the next year's product while the current product's going on. So if you think about sort of the chain from the inventor, the designer at the beginning, and the marketer on the back end, the people who are in the sales guy on the back end, the guys on the back end are marketing. So this is a great example, right? Right now, the marketing, the sales guys are finishing off 2020, right? They're selling the last, we're kind of done now. Christmas is in 4 or 5 days. But the design guys are finishing 2021 and they're going to start 2022. So you have a huge long product development cycle. And a lot of that really, there's a function within large companies that do a lot of innovation, there's a function that's basically tracks the whole product development cycle. And they usually are, and that function is critical to having, I don't care whether it's toy business or anything else, anybody who's got to do a fair amount of innovation, there's a relatively small group that's basically the schedulers. And what they do is they sort of drive and keep track of everything from legal and patents and design and development and packaging and advertising, everything for all the products, and keep them on time and hitting the milestones. Because without sort of that discipline and without that sort of product development cycle, you're right, you end up like drowning in the morass because there's so much you've got to do all at once and you can't remember all the pieces and parts. So that's a critical function. It's kind of like the axle on the car. If you don't have a good axle, you're going nowhere. And it's a function that especially startup companies or smaller companies that haven't done a lot of innovation forget. And the guy who came up with the original idea or the original innovator tries to do it on his own, and it kills him because it's a skill set that tends to be more kind of engineering, right? It's very, orderly. And a lot of design people just right brain, left brain, it doesn't really work that way. So it's a key function to kind of make it all work. And in bigger corporations, there were probably 100 people who did that job at Mattel across the various divisions. So it's not even like one or two people. And there's a fair amount of software around all of that now. And there's actually classes at universities. If people are interested, there's actually classes and there's a specialty in that development right now where you can go get that. And it's a relatively well-paid job as well because it's in high demand almost everywhere now.
I had a question too. So specifically, like when you changed jobs, moving from like smaller corporations to bigger ones, also like multinational ones, were there any specific insights that you gained that eventually helped lead you to the rise, eventually like, cultivating into your role as president at Mattel?
Oh yeah, without a doubt, you learned a lot as you sort of move through each of the companies, large, small, domestic, international, service and marketing, and you bring with them. And it's funny, it's a combination of two things. It's classic, right? It's things that you would do and things that you would never do, right? So whenever you might have a bad boss or you had a bad, because everybody has what I call their scars, right? If I took off my shirt, I've got all the mistakes I've ever made, like, the scars and whips on my back from like whatever. And you sort of take those with you as you go along. But I think the biggest thing is how to maximize the value of the employees and how to make it all work. To give you an idea, we developed at one of the small companies and we took to Mattel the idea of an employee award night, right? And what we do is everybody got all dressed up in fancy clothes and people got tuxedos on. And we had a huge big award night where we would give out awards at the end of the year to people. And the funny thing was, right? And so everybody thinks, oh, it's going to be for the best product or the best this and that. And we did some of that, but we also did the biggest failure that we learned the most from, right? And the whole idea on some of it was to make sure your culture allowed people to take risks and not think they're going to get punished. Because in small companies, people inherently do that because there aren't enough people. So everybody's got to kind of run around and do their thing. In big companies, sometimes people get afraid to take risks because they're like, oh my God, what will happen? And we started giving out awards for people who took good educated risks and it ended up a disaster. It failed for whatever reason. People didn't want the product. It didn't sell, whatever the reason was, but it was well thought out and people did it and they took an intelligent risk. And so we found that sort of taking some of the things from the small companies and moving them large, it made a big difference. And it's really, I can't emphasize enough the importance of engaging your employees to make them feel like they can make a difference. I mean, if you can do that, you can take the hill in a way that's incredible versus just being the general and you say charge and everybody else is still sitting at the lunch table.
So, sorry, I have another question. How have business models changed over the past 20 years with the introduction of more commercially available and advanced technology like the iPhone? Also considering that now younger kids these days are getting iPhones and iPads and maybe straying away from toys.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things that happen. One thing is because of the internet and the global nature of things, the first important thing that happened is everybody wants the same thing at the same time. So 20 years ago, the toys somebody might want in France or Russia or Saudi Arabia or Mexico might have been different than what they want in the US or Japan or someplace else. Now it's all the same and everybody wants it at the same time. The second thing is it's clear that technology in general has brought the concept of play online, right? And so the ability to do multiplayer games on the iPhone or on the computer or something else has certainly taken a chunk of the toy business, which still is somewhere around $22-23 billion. And so what the toy guys have tried to do is figure out ways to make their brand exist in those spaces. So that's where you'll see Transformers or Star Wars or Batman or Barbie exist in other places. You'll see online versions of their games. You'll see television shows. You'll see movies. You'll see various different things where somebody is taking a brand, a toy brand that 20 or 30 years ago might have only existed in plastic, now exists in a whole variety of areas, particularly on the electronic side of things. You'll see a lot of sort of software and games and entertainment and movies, and you'll see those brands, those toy brands trying to stay relevant to older kids, but just in a different way. So the toy company is still making money on Barbie, but it's going to be a Barbie movie or a Barbie video game to a 12-year-old versus 20 or 30 years ago, it might have been a plastic Barbie doll. Anybody have anything else?
I guess I have one question. So you were talking about how like you used to have at the employee award night, like the award for the biggest failure. So what would you say is like the biggest failure that you saw during your time at Mattel or at any of the companies that shaped like how you guys approach things in the future?
Well, it's interesting. There have been so many failures. Two of them were interesting, right? One of which is probably predates all of you guys. One was a brand called Captain Power. And Captain Power came out in 1985, and it was a toy brand, a space-based toy brand that allowed you to fire at the television set, and they had Captain Power television shows, and it would have an impact on your spaceship. And the problem, we were just 5-10 years too early. And so it died a miserable death. Nobody bought any of the stuff. And then 10 years later, suddenly everybody's doing all of that. The Mattel actually introduced in television, for those of you who may or may not know that, and it predates Nintendo and Sega by like 2 or 3 years. And we missed the opportunity to have the console game thing, and it was kind of crazy. And then another one was when they tried to fight with Bratz and Barbie and introduced some segments that were inconsistent with Barbie's image and stuff. There was one called Flavas, and it really didn't work at all. And what it did is it told us what we had to do is stick to our knitting, what we knew, and sort of how to build the brand and stay contemporary rather than going to something where somebody said, well, wait, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't go with your business at all. So one of the key things was, and you know, a lot of times when people fail, they kind of go like this, and like nobody wants to own the failure or whatever. We called it celebrating the failure, because the truth is, if you didn't figure out why you failed, that was a bigger mistake than figuring out why you were successful. Because you can always take what you learn from failing and build on that, where sometimes when you're successful, you delude yourself into why you think you're successful. You think we're just great and smart and whatever. And it's really learning from failure is what makes you continue to innovate. So again, I encourage you guys, have some fun, go out and think about some of the things we talked about, and sort of, you know, in your own mind or with your friends, just say like, why is that on YouTube? Or what were they trying to do? I look at commercials all the time and do that and say like, who are they kidding? Who are they talking to? What's that supposed to be about? And I think you'll have some fun being an armchair quarterback. and go out and look at some of these companies. Marketing of the future it's going to be a challenge, but it's going to be so important to these companies if they're going to stay successful and continue to innovate. Otherwise, you're going to be one of the dead ones, and you don't want to be working with them.
Okay, thank you so much for talking today and answering all of our questions. It was a really great experience, and I think this is a new topic that we haven't had yet. So we really appreciate you doing the time or taking the time to do that. So I think Brandon wanted to say something.
Yeah. Just gonna thank my dad, obviously. Thanks so much for all the insights about a field that means so much to me and that I'm really passionate about. Before Lizzie talks a little bit about the next events, I'm going to put a link in the chat. It's a survey about the event. If you could go ahead and fill that out, that'd be great. Thank you so much for attending.
Yeah, so thank you, Brandon, for setting this up. I think everyone learned a lot, and I think this actually sets us up really well for our next event in January, because we're having the CMO of Innova. So now you know how to think about marketing. When he talks about online lending and the evolution of that over time. So we have that coming up, and then we also have a JEC community initiative leadership boot camp, just so you're prepared to, if you're interested in volunteering in the future and participating in high returns. So we'll send out more information after the event about it. It's also in the survey that we'd appreciate if everyone could complete, and that'll be used to track attendance as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming again today, and Mr. Bousquette for speaking. And so I hope you all have a great rest of your night and holidays and break, and take some time to enjoy yourself. So thank you.